Lyddie by Katherine Paterson, Chapter 13, Speed Up. Lyddie could not keep the silly song out of her head. It clacked and whistled along with the machinery. Oh, I cannot be a slave. I will not be a slave. She wasn't a slave. She was a free woman of the state of Vermont, earning her own way in the world. Whatever Diana or even Betsy might think, she, Lyddie, was far less a slave than most any girl she knew of. They mustn't spoil it for her with their petitions and turnouts. They mustn't meddle with the system and bring it all clanging down to ruin. She liked Diana, really she did, yet she found herself avoiding her friend as though radicalism were something catching, like diphtheria. She knew Mr. Marsden was beginning to keep track of the girls who stopped by Diana's looms. She could see him watching and taking mental note. When Diana came her way, Lyddie could feel herself stiffening up, and when Diana invited her to one of the Tuesday night meetings, Lyddie said no so fiercely that she scared herself. Diana didn't ask again. It ain't about you, Lyddie wanted to say. It's me. I just want to go home. Please understand, Diana, it ain't about you. The 10-hour people were putting out a weekly newspaper, the voice of industry. Lyddie tried to keep her eyes from straying toward the copies of the weekly, which were thrown with seeming carelessness on the parlor table. Then one night, after supper, she and Amelia came upstairs to find Betsy chortling over the paper in their bedroom. Here, she said, holding it out to Lyddie, read this. Those plucky women are going after the legislature now. Lyddie recoiled as though someone had offered her the hot end of a poker. Oh, Lyddie, Betsy said, don't be afraid to read something you might not agree with. Leave Lyddie alone, Betsy. You'll only get her into trouble. Never fret, Amelia. Our Lyddie loves money too much to risk trouble. Lyddie flushed furiously. She was worried about the money, but she wished Betsy wouldn't put it like that. She wanted to explain to them, to justify herself. Maybe if she told them about the bear, about how close her family'd come to moving to the poor farm. Maybe if she told them about Charlie, how bright he was, and how she knew he could do as good at college as Betsy's stuck-up brother. Only Charlie wasn't at Harvard. He was sweeping chaff off a mill floor, and little Agnes had gone to God. She shuddered and held her peace. It might sound like cowardly excuses when the words were formed, but it didn't matter if they understood or not. As much as she admired Diana, she wouldn't be tricked by her, or even by Betsy, to joining any protest. Just another year or two, and she could go home free. I got to write Mama, she thought. I got to tell her how hard I'm working to pay off the debt. Dear Mother, I was made quite sad by your letter telling of my sister Agnes's death. I am concerned that you are not taking proper care of your health. I have enclosed $1. Please get yourself and little Rachel good food and, if possible, a warm shawl for the winter. I will send more next payday. I try to save for the debt, but you must tell me how much it is exactly. And do I send it direct to Mr. Westcott or to some bank? I'm well. I work hard. Your loving daughter, Lydia Worthing. She checked her spelling and Oliver, the grammar as well. She felt a little thrill of pride. She knew she was improving in her writing. Not that her mother would be able to tell, but Charlie would. She took a second sheet to begin a letter to him, then hesitated, suddenly shy. It had been so long. She hardly knew what to say. I must go to see him soon as my year is up, she thought. I'll lose touch. Or, he'll forget me. She jerked her head to loosen the thought. Charlie would no more forget her than the snow would forget to fall on Camel's Hump Mountain. But she should write. He might think she had forgotten him. Dear Charlie. No, dear Charles. He was nearly a man now and might not like a pet name. Dear Charles. She held the pen so tight her fingers cramped. I have heard from Mother that little Agnes has died. Did she write you as well this sad news? We must get Mother and Rachel home soon. I am saving most of my wages for the debt. I am working hard and making good pay. We can go home soon. I still hop. Ha ha. I trust you are well. I am as ever your loving sister, Lydia Worthing. A great blob of ink fell from the pen right at her name. She blotted it, but the black spread up into the body of the letter. She tried to tell herself that it didn't matter, that Charlie would not be bothered, but she was too bothered by it herself. She'd meant the letter to show him how well she was doing, how she was learning and studying as well as working, but the black stain ruined it. She destroyed the page and could not seem to start another. No matter how fast the machine speeded up, Lyddie was somehow able to keep pace. She never wasted energy worrying or complaining. It was almost as if they had exchanged natures, as though she had become the machine, perfectly tuned to the roaring, clattering beasts in her care. Think of them as bears, she'd tell herself. Great, clumsy bears. You can face down bears. From his high stool at the back corner of the great room, she could almost feel the eyes of the overseer upon her. Indeed, when Mr. Marsden got up to stroll the room, he always stopped at her looms. She was often startled by the touch of his puffy white hand upon her sleeve, and when she turned, his little mouth would be forming something she took to be complimentary, for his eyes were crinkled as though the skin about them had cracked in the attempt to smile. She would nod acknowledgment and turn back to her machines, which at least did not reach out and pat you when you weren't watching. He was a strange little man. Lyddie tried once to imagine him dressing in the morning, his impeccable wife tying that impeccable tie, brushing down that black coat which by 6 a.m. would be white with the lint blowing about the gigantic room. Did she polish his head as well? And with what? You couldn't use shoe black, of course. Was there a head grease that could be applied and then rubbed to a high shine? She saw the overseer's impeccable wife with the end of a towel in either hand briskly polishing her husband's head just above the ears, then carefully combing back the few strands of grayish hair from one ear to the other. It was hard to put a face on the overseer's wife. Was she a meek, obedient little woman, or someone like Miss Cutler, who would rule him as he ruled the girls under his watchful eye? Not a happy woman, though, for Mr. Marsden did not seem to be the stuff from which contentment could be woven. Soon there was little time to wonder and daydream. She had done so well on her 2 then 3 machines that Mr. Marsden gave her a 4th loom to tend. Now she hardly noticed people any more. At mealtimes, the noise and complaints and banter of the other girls were like the commotion of a distant parade. She paid no attention that the food was not as bountiful as it had once been. There was still more than she could eat, nor did she notice that the taste of the meat was a bit off or the potatoes moldy. She ate the food set before her steadily, with no attempt to bolt as much as possible in the short time allotted. When the bell rang, it didn't matter what was left untasted. She simply pushed back from the table and went back to her bears. She was too tired now at night to copy out a page of Oliver to paste to her loom. It hardly mattered. When would she have had time to study it? After supper, she stumbled upstairs, hardly taking time to wash, changed to her shift, and fell into bed. Though Amelia cajoled and Miss Bedloe made announcements at mealtime, Lyddie did not attempt to go to church. Her body wouldn't have cooperated even if she'd had the desire to go. She slept out Sunday mornings and forced herself up for dinner, which she ate, as she ate all her meals now, automatically and without conversation. She was as likely to nap again in the afternoon as not. It's like being a racehorse, Betsy was saying. The harder we work, the bigger prize they get. Amelia murmured something in reply, which Lyddie was too near sleep to make out. I've made up my mind to sign the next petition. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I just? Betsy laughed. The golden lad finishes Harvard this spring. His fees are paid up, and I've got nearly the money I need now. My Latin is done. So as soon as I complete my botany course, I'll be ready to leave this insane asylum. Even Lyddie's sleep-drugged mind could feel a twinge. She did not want Betsy to go. It would be grand, going out with the bang of a dishonorable dismissal. But where would you go? You've always said you could never settle in Maine. Not to Maine, Amelia. To Ohio. I'm aiming to go to college. To college? Do I surprise you, Amelia? Betsy, in public the devourer of novels, in secret a woman of great ambition. College. I wouldn't have imagined. If they dismiss me, I'd have to stop stalling and blathering and get myself to Oberlin College and a new life. By now, Lyddie was propped up on her elbow listening, torn between pride for Betsy and horror at what she was proposing. So you're awake after all, our sleeping beauty. Lyddie, tell her not to be foolish. I'd hate you to leave, Lyddie said quietly. Betsy snorted. I'd be gone a month and a half before you'd ever notice, she said. The overseers were being offered premiums, prizes to the men whose girls produced the most goods in a pay period, which was why the machines were speeded and why the girls hardly dared take time off even when they were feverish. If you can't do the work, Lyddie heard Mr. Marsden say to a girl at the breakfast break, there's many a girl who can and will. We've no place for sickly girls in this room. Many girls, those with families who could support them or sweethearts ready to marry them, went home, and new girls came in to replace them. Their speech was strange and their clothing even stranger. They didn't live in the corporation boarding houses, but in that part of the city known as the Acre. The Acre wasn't part of the tour for foreign dignitaries who came to view the splendor of Lowell, the model factory city of the New World. Near the northern canal, sprouting up like toadstools, rose the squat shacks of rough boards and turf, with only a tiny window and a few holes to let in light, and each jammed with Irish Catholics who, it was said, bred like wharf rats. Rumor also had it that these papists were willing to work for lower wages, and since the corporations did not subsidize their board and keep, the Irish girls were cheaper still to hire. Diana was helping the new girls settle in, teaching them just as she had taught Lyddie in the spring. Lyddie herself was far too busy to help anyone else. She could not fall behind in her production, else her pay would drop, and before she knew it, one of these cussed papists would have her job. Often now the tune came unbidden to her head, "Oh, I cannot be a slave, I will not be a slave." It was a dreary December without the abundance of snow that Lyddie yearned for. What snow fell soon turned to a filthy sludge under the feet of too many people and the soot and ashes from too many chimneys. Her body itched even more than it usually did in winter. The tub of hot water that first night in Miss Bedloe's bedroom proved to be her only full bath in the city, for like most of the companies, the Concord Corporation had not seen fit to provide bathhouses for their workers. The girls were obliged to wash themselves using only the wash basins in their rooms, to which Tim hauled a pitcher of cold water once a day. Despite the winter temperatures, the factory stayed hot with the heat of the machinery. The hundreds of whale oil lamps lit against the winter's short, dark days, and the steam piped into the rooms to keep the air humid, lest warp threads break needlessly and precious time and materials be wasted. Lyddie went to work in the icy darkness and returned again at night. She never saw the sun. The brief noon break did not help. The sky was always oppressive and gray, and the smoke of thousands of chimneys hung low and menacing. At the Lawrence Corporation, just down the river bank from the Concord, a girl had slipped on the icy staircase in the rush to dinner. She had broken her neck in the fall, and the very same day a man loading finished bolts of cloth onto the railroad cars in the Lawrence mill yard had been run over and crushed. There were no deaths at the Concord Corporation, but one of the little Irish girls in the spinning room had caught her hair in the machinery and was badly hurt. Diana took up a collection for the hospital fees, but Lyddie had no money on her person. Besides, how could she give a contribution to some foreigner when she had her own poor baby sister to think of? She vowed to send her mother something next payday. She had opened a bank account, and it was growing. She watched it the way one watched a heifer, hardly patient for the time to come when you could milk it. She tried not to resent withdrawing money to send to her mother, but she could see the balance grow each payday. She hadn't seen her mother for 2 years. She had no way of knowing what her true needs were, and surely, as mean as Judah was, and as crazy as Clarissa might be, they would not let their own sister or her child go hungry. Christmas was not a holiday. It came and went hardly noticed. Amelia had a New Year's gift from her mother, a pair of woolen gloves, which she wrapped again in the paper they had come in and hid in her trunk. Only someone fresh from the farm or one of the Irish would wear a pair of homemade gloves in Lowell. Betsy's brother sent her a volume of essays, "To Improve My Mind." She laughed about his gift, knowing that it had been bought out of the money she sent him each month for his school allowance. "Oh well," she said, "only a few more months and our golden lad'll be on his own. Ah, if only our sexes had been reversed. Imagine him putting me through college." Lyddie received no gifts, indeed expected none, but she did get a note from Tryphena, who thanked her for returning the loan. There was little news to report from Cutler's. She asked after Lyddie's health and complained that the mistress was as harsh as ever. Willie had run off at last, and the new boy and girl weren't worth 2 blasts on a penny whistle. Lyddie had to smile. Poor Tryphena. Was she thinking of Tryphena when it happened, or was she overtired? It was late on Friday, the hardest time of the week. Was she careless when she replaced the shuttle in the right-hand box, or had there been a knot in the weft thread? She would never know. She remembered rethreading the shuttle and putting it back in the race, yanking the lever into its slot. Before she could think, she was on the floor, blood pouring through the hair near her right temple. The shuttle, the blasted shuttle. She tried to rise. She needed to stop the loom, but Diana got there almost at once, racing along the road, tripping with both hands the levers of her own machines and Lyddie's 4 as she ran. She knelt down beside Lyddie. "Dear God," she said, cradling Lyddie's head in her lap. She pulled her handkerchief from her pocket and held it tight against Lyddie's temple. It filled immediately with blood. She eased her apron out from under Lyddie's head, snatched it off her shoulders, and pressed it against the soaked handkerchief. Girls had begun to gather. "Give me some cold water, Delia, clean," she cried after the girl, "and handkerchiefs, please, all of you," she cried to the girls crowding about them. Mr. Marsden's head appeared in the circle of heads above them. The girls shifted to make room for the overseer. "What's this here?" His voice was stern, but his face went ashen as he looked down at the 2 girls. "She was hit by the shuttle," Diana said. What? He yelled above the noise. Shuttle, shuttle, shuttle. The word wished back and forth across the circle like a shuttle in a race. Well, get her out of here. He clamped a large blue pocket handkerchief over his nose and mouth and hurried back to his high stool. Not partial to the sight of blood, are we? The speaker was kneeling on the floor beside Diana, offering her the dainty white handkerchief she had collected from the operatives. The cool water came at last. Diana lifted her apron from Lyddie's temple. The first gush of blood had eased now to a trickle. She dipped a handkerchief into the water and, gently as a cow licking its newborn, cleaned the wound. Can you see all right? She asked. I think so. Lyddie's head pounded, but when she opened her eyes she could see nearly as well as she ever could in the dusty, lamp-lit room. She closed her eyes almost at once against the pain. How about your stomach? Do you feel sick? Lyddie shook her head, then stopped. Any movement seemed to make the pain worse. There was a sound of ripping cloth at Lyddie's ear. She opened her eyes. Your apron, Lyddie said. Don't. Aprons cost money. Diana seemed not to hear, continuing to tear until her apron was in shreds. She bound the least bloodied pieces around Lyddie's head and tied them in place with a narrower strip. Do you think you could stand up? She asked. In answer, Lyddie started to get up. Diana and Delia helped her to her feet. Just stand here for a minute, Diana said. Don't try to move yet. The room spun. She reached out toward the beam of the loom to steady herself. Diana put her arm around Lyddie's shoulders. Lean on me, she said. I'll take you home. The bell ain't rung, Lyddie protested weakly. Oh, Lyddie, Lyddie, Diana said. Whatever shall we do with you? She sighed and pulled Lyddie close. Delia, help us down the stairs, please. I think I can get her the rest of the way by myself. Slowly, slowly they went, stopping every few feet to rest. We don't want to open that cut again, Diana said. Easy, easy. Miss Bedloe helped Diana take Lyddie up the stairs to the second-floor infirmary, not her own room as she wished, but Lyddie's head pounded too much for her to insist that they take her up still another flight of stairs. I'll send Tim for Dr. Morris, she heard Miss Bedloe saying. No, no, Lyddie wanted to say, doctors cost money. No, Diana was saying, not Dr. Morris, Dr. Craven, on Fletcher Street. She was asleep when the doctor arrived, but she opened her eyes when she heard the murmur of voices above her. Lyddie, Diana was saying softly, Dr. Craven needs to look at the wound. They were there, the two of them, standing above her. Diana's familiar face flushed, smiling anxiously down at her, and the doctor's. He was a handsome, bearded gentleman, young, his dark brown eyes studying her own, his long, thin hands already reaching to loosen Diana's makeshift bandage. Now let's look at that cut of yours, he said, in a tone compounded of concern and assurance. The perfect doctor. Lyddie gasped. He drew his hands back. Are you in pain? He asked. Lyddie shook her head. It was not pain that had startled her. It was the doctor himself. She had seen him before, with Diana, last summer on Merrimack Street. Chapter 14. Ills and Petitions. By Saturday afternoon she was back in her own room, and by Sunday the pain had dulled. Dr. Craven had cut her hair away from the wound and bound her head in a proper bandage, but she took it off. She was going back to work the next day, bald spot and all. She'd never been vain, never had anything to be vain about, to tell the truth. No need to start and fussing over her looks now. At first Amelia and Miss Bedloe objected to her returning to work so soon, but they quickly gave up. Lyddie would go to work no matter what. If you can't do the work, Mr. Marsden had said. Besides, Diana came by Sunday evening and said she was looking quite fit again. Diana should know, shouldn't she? She went to bed early, but she couldn't sleep. Her head seemed to throb more when she was lying down. She thought about her family. Suppose that cussed shuttle had killed her, or put out her eye. What would they do? And Diana, what was Lyddie to think? She hadn't dared ask about Dr. Craven. Diana hadn't explained why she sent for him instead of Dr. Morris, who usually cared for the girls at number 5. Dr. Craven seemed as good a doctor as any. Better. He didn't leave a bill. The curfew bell rang. Amelia came to bed. Betsy did too, though she kept her candle burning, studying into the night as she often did. At last she blew out the light and slid down under the quilts. Then it began. That awful tearing sound that Lyddie would come to dread with every knotted inch of nerves through her whole silently screeching body. Finally it stopped. Betsy, I do wish you'd see Dr. Morris about that cough. Amelia's voice came from the next bed. I'm a big girl, Amelia. Don't nag. I'm not nagging. If you weren't so stubborn. What would he tell me, Amelia? To rest? How can I do that? I've only got a few more months to go. If I stop now, I'm going to stop. What? There was a sigh in the darkness. I'm leaving. Going home. Home? I've come to hate factory life. Oh, Betsy, I hate what it's doing to me. I don't even know myself anymore. This corporation is turning me into a sour old spinster. It's just the winter. Betsy's voice was kinder than usual. It's hard to stay cheerful in the dark. Come spring, you'll be our resident saint once more. Amelia ignored the tease. I've been through winter before, she said. It's not the season. She sighed again, more deeply than before. I'm tired, Betsy. I can't keep up the pace. Who can, except our Amazonian Lyddie? Betsy's laugh turned abruptly into a cough that shook the whole bed. Lyddie scrunched up tightly into herself and tried to block out the sound and the rusty saw hacking through her own chest. Had Betsy been coughing like this for long? Why hadn't she heard it before? Surely there must be some syrup or tonic, even opium. You must see the doctor about that cough, Amelia said. Promise me you will. I'll make a pact with you, Amelia. I'll see the doctor if you'll promise to stay until summer. I can't think of number 5 without you. She stopped to cough, then cleared her throat and said in a still husky voice, How could I manage? You're the plague of my life, my guardian angel. There was a funny kind of closeness between her roommates after that night, but even so, Amelia went home the last week of January to visit and didn't come back. She wrote that her father had found her a teaching post in the next village. Forgive me, Betsy, she wrote, and do, please, I beg you, go to see the doctor. With a bed to herself, Lyddie was less distressed by Betsy's coughing, and though Betsy never quite got around to seeing Dr. Morris, she was better, Lyddie told herself. Surely the cough was less racking than it had been. Lyddie missed Amelia. She would have imagined that she'd feel relief to have her gone, but Betsy was right. They both needed her in an odd sort of way, their nettlesome guardian angel. Her cut was quite healed. Her hair grew out and covered the scar. She was working as well and as hard as ever. Her January pay came to $11.20, exclusive of board. Everything was going well for her when Mr. Marsden stopped her one evening as she was about to leave. The machines were quiet, so she could not pretend deafness. You're feeling fine again? No problems with the head? She nodded and made as if to go. You have to take care of yourself. You're my best girl, you know. He put his hand on her sleeve. She looked down at it, and he slipped it off. His face reddened slightly, and his little round mouth worked a bit on the next sentence. We're getting new operators in tomorrow. Not nearly so clever as you, but promising. If I could put one in your care, let her work as a spare hand on one of your machines. Oh, hang it all. How could she say no? How could she explain that she must not be slowed down? She couldn't have some dummy monkeying with her looms. I gotta make my pieces, she muttered. Yes, he said, of course you do. It would only be for a day or so. I wouldn't let anyone hinder you. He smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. You're my prize girl here. I'm not your girl. I'm not anybody's girl but my own. So it's settled, he said, reaching out as though to pat her again, but Lyddie quickly shifted her arm to escape the touch. The new girl, Brigid, was from the acre, an Irish papist through and through, wearing layers of strange capes and smelling even worse than Lyddie herself. Lyddie scented more than poverty and winter sweat. She whiffed disaster. The girl's only asset was a better command of proper New England speech than most of her lot. Not that she spoke often. She seemed deafened by the machinery and too cowed to ask questions even when she needed to. As for tying knots, a basic weaver's knot, the girl simply couldn't do them. Lyddie demonstrated, her powdered fingers pinching, looping, slipping, pulling, all in one fluid motion that magically produced a healed, warped thread, with no hint of a lump to betray the break. You don't even watch, the girl cried out in alarm, and of course Lyddie didn't. She had no need to. Her fingers could have tied that knot in a privy at midnight, and it would have held. It would have been invisible as well. Here, she said, barely clinging to patience, I'll do it more slowly. She slapped off all 4 machines. With her scissors, she cut 2 threads from a bobbin and asked the girl to the window where the light was best. She wasted at least 5 precious minutes tying and retying the useless knot till finally the girl was able, however clumsily, to tie a lumpy knot herself. Lyddie jerked a nod. It'll get better with practice, she said gruffly, anxious to get the stilled looms roaring once more. Threading the shuttle was, if anything, worse. Lyddie popped the full bobbin into the shuttle and then, as always, put her mouth through the hole and sucked the thread through, pulled it to length, wrapped it quickly on a hook of the temple, dropped the shuttle into the race, and restarted the loom. The next time the quill had to be replaced, she had Brigid thread it, and, as she watched the girl put her mouth over the hole and suck out the thread, the words "kiss of death" came to mind. She had always thought the words a joke among the weavers, but here was this strange-smelling foreigner sucking Lyddie's shuttles, leaving her spittle all over the thread-hole. Lyddie wiped the point quickly on her apron before she banged the shuttle against the far end of the race. We don't want any flying shuttles, she yelled, her face nearly as crimson as the Irish girl's. By the end of the first day, the girl was far from ready to operate her own machine, but Lyddie had run out of patience. She told Mr. Marsden to assign the girl a loom next to her own. I'll watch out for her and tend my own machines as well. Before the noon break of the next day, a flying shuttle had grazed the girl's shoulder, and she had let the shuttle run out of weft, ruining several inches of cloth. When a warp thread snapped, instead of instantly hitting the lever to stall the loom, she threw her apron over her head and burst into tears. "Shut off your loom," Lyddie yelled over to her. "You can tie the knot this time. You should know how by now, eh?" The girl burst into tears again, and before Lyddie could decide what to do with her, Diana was there, slapping off the loom. Burning with shame, Lyddie glanced over as Diana, without a quiver of impatience, helped the girl retrieve the broken ends and tie a weaver's knot. When, finally, Diana stood back and told the girl to pull the lever into place, Lyddie touched Diana's shoulder. "Sorry," she mouthed. Diana nodded and went back to work. At the last bell, Lyddie found herself going down the stairs beside Diana. "She's going to do fine, your Bridget," Diana said. "Oh, I don't know," Lyddie said, wondering how Diana knew the girl's name, and then annoyed that the foreigner should be hers. Surely Lyddie had never wanted her. She seems all thumbs and tears. They be such fools, those Irish. Diana gave a wry smile. "We're all allowed to be fools the first week or two, aren't we?" Lyddie blushed furiously. "I never thanked you proper for taking care of me before," she said. "And your doctor, he never sent a bill. Mind you, I'm not complaining, but—" Diana didn't comment on the doctor. "Your head seems to have quite recovered. How do you feel? No pain, I hope?" "Oh, I'm all right," Lyddie said. "Just ornery as a old sow." "Ornery enough to add your name to the petition?" Diana whispered. She was teasing her. Lyddie was sure of it. "I don't reckon I aim to ever get that ornery," Lyddie said. Betsy signed the petition. One of the female labor reform girls caught her in an apothecary shop one evening and got her to write in her name. Lyddie was furious. "They got you when you was feeling low," she said. "They go creeping around the city taking advantage when girls are feeling sick or worn out. Now you'll be blacklisted, and what will I do without you?" Better to go out with a flourish than a whine, don't you think? But Betsy was never allowed her imagined exit. She was to be neither blacklisted nor dismissed. Her cough got no better. She asked for a transfer to the drawing room. The work of drawing the warp threads from the beam through the harness and reeds had to be done painstakingly by hand. The air was cleaner in the drawing room, and there was much less noise. Though the threading took skill, it did not take the physical strength demanded in the machine rooms, and the girls sat on high stools as they worked. The drawing room was a welcome change for Betsy, but the move came too late to help. The coughing persisted. She began to spend days in their bedroom, then the house infirmary, until finally, when blood showed up in her phlegm, Miss Bedloe demanded that she be removed to the hospital. On Sunday, Lyddie went to see her, taking her botany text and a couple of novels that cost Lyddie 20 cents at the lending library. "You've got to get me out of here," Betsy said between fits of coughing. "They'll bleed me of every penny I've saved." But where could Betsy go? Miss Bedloe would not have her in the house, unwilling to bear the responsibility, and Dr. Morris had declared her too weak to travel to Maine to her uncle's. Lyddie wrote the brother. He was only in Cambridge, less than a day away by coach or train, but there was a 3-week delay before he wrote to say that he was studying for his final examinations and would, perhaps, be able to come for a visit at the end of the term. Betsy only laughed. "Well," she said, "he's our darling baby boy." Then she fell to coughing. There was a red stain on her handkerchief. "But you sent him all the way through that college of his. Wouldn't you do as much for your Charlie?" "But Charlie is—" Lyddie was going to say nice, and stopped herself just in time. "Our parents are dead, and he's the son and heir," Betsy said, as though that explained everything. Betsy grew a little stronger as the weather warmed, and in April her uncle came to take her to Maine. By then her savings were gone, along with her good looks. "Keep my bed for me, Lyddie. I'll be back next year to start all over again. Some day I'll have enough money to go to college, no matter how much the piece rate drops. I may be the oldest girl in the corporation before I have the money again, but if they let women into Oberlin at all, surely they won't fuss about gray hair and a few wrinkles." "She'll never come back," Lyddie thought sadly as she watched the buggy disappear around the corner, headed for the depot and the train north. "You'll never be strong enough again to work in a mill 13-14 hours a day. When I'm ready to go myself," she thought, "maybe I could sign that cussed petition. Not for me. I don't need it. But for Betsy and the others. It ain't right for this place to suck the strength of their youth, then cast them off like dry husks to the wind." He was standing by the front door of number 5 when she came with the rush of girls for the noon meal. Lyddie Worthen. He said her name so quietly that she almost went past him without hearing. "Miss Lyddie." She turned toward the voice, which didn't seem familiar, to see a tall man she didn't know. Later she realized that he had not been wearing his broad black Quaker hat. She would have known him at once in his hat. His hair in the sunlight was the rusty red of a robin's breast. Several girls nudged her and giggled as they pushed past her up the steps to the boarding house. "I was hoping thee would come," he said. He was so tall he had to stoop over to speak to her. "I'm Luke Stevens." His grave brown eyes searched her face. "Has thee forgotten?" "No," she said, "I'd not forgot. I just never expected. I wondered if thee would know me in this strange garb." He was wearing shirt and trousers of coarse cotton jean, the kind of cloth the Lowell mills spit out by the mile. She would have known him at once in his Quaker hat and his mother's brown homespun. "I'm fetching some freight from down Boston way," he said almost in a whisper, glancing over his shoulder as he spoke. "They tend to look out for friends on the road." "Oh," she said, not really understanding. "My pa sent thee this," he said, handing her a thick brown parcel about the size of a small book. He didn't want to risk the post with it, and since I was coming down Boston way. She took the parcel from his big, rough farmer fist. "I thank you for your trouble," she said. It was no trouble. Was he blushing behind that sun and wind-weathered face? How odd he seemed. She felt a need to be polite. "Maybe Mis' Bedloe could find you some dinner," she said. "We was just coming to eat. I can't stay longer. I'm due in Boston. But I'm obliged," he said. "Well, I'd best be on my way." Well, she could hear the calls and clatter of the dinner hour even through the closed front door. She'd hardly have a minute to eat her meal if he didn't go. "It's mighty good to see thee, Lyddie Worthen," he said. "We miss having thee up the hill." She tried to smile at him. "Thank you for the whatever the strange parcel was. It was good of you to bring it all this way." When on earth would he leave? "Thy Charlie is well," he said. "I was by the mill just last week." Charlie. He's doing well? Fit and content? Cheerful as ever. He's a fine boy, Lyddie. "Yes, I know. Give him my best when you see him again, eh?" He nodded. "Thy house came through the winter in good shape." He saw her glimpse the door. "I mustn't hold thee longer from thy dinner," he said. "God keep you." "And you," she said. He grinned goodbye and was gone. She didn't have time to open the parcel until after supper. Enclosed in several layers of brown paper was a strange, official-looking document, which at first she could make no sense of, and a letter in a strange hand. "My dear Miss Lydia, by now you have despaired of me and decided that I am a man who does not honor his word. Please forgive my tardiness. Thanks to the good offices of our friends the Stevensons, true friends indeed, as well as your gracious loan, I was able to make my way safely to Montreal. I have now the great joy of my family's presence. Enclosed, therefore, herein is a draft which can never repay my great debt to you. With everlasting gratitude, your friend, Ezekiel Freeman." She could not believe it. $50. The next day she used her dinner break to race to the bank. Yes, it was a genuine draft from a solvent Montreal bank. $50. With one piece of paper her account had bulged like a cow about to freshen. She must find out at once what the debt was. She might already have enough to cover it. Why hadn't her mother replied to her inquiry? Did her mother even know what the debt was? Did she care? Oh, mercy, had the woman always hated the farm? Was she glad to have it off her hands? Lyddie wrote again that very night. "Dear Mother, you have not answered my letter of some months previous. I need to know the total sum of the debt. Write soon. Your loving daughter, Lydia Worthen." She didn't take the time to check her spelling. She sealed the letter at once, then reluctantly reopened it to slip in $1. She awoke once in the night and pondered on what she had once been and what she seemed to have become. She marveled that there had been a time when she had almost gladly given a perfect stranger everything she had, but now found it hard to send her own mother $1. Chapter 15, Rachel. She told no one about the money. She wanted to tell Diana. Diana she knew would rejoice with her, but she decided to wait. She was so close now to having the money she needed, and when she did, she would surprise Diana by signing the petition. Then, not more than a week after Luke had brought the money, she had a second visitor who turned her life upside down. She had left the bedroom door open, trying to encourage a faint breeze through the stuffy room while she washed out her stockings and underwear in the basin. Suddenly she was aware of Tim standing in the doorway. She looked up from her washing. "There's a visitor for you in the parlor. Ma says to tell you, a gentleman." Charlie! She was sure it must be he, all grown up to a gentleman, for who else would come to see her? She could hardly count Luke Stevens. She squeezed the water from her laundry and hastily wiped her hands upon her apron as she ran down the stairs. But it wasn't Charlie waiting in the corner of the dining room that Miss Bedloe called a parlor, nor was it Luke. She wondered why Tim had called him a gentleman at all. At first she was sure he was a stranger. He seemed so out of place in the room of neatly dressed, chattering factory girls, this short man, very thin, with a weathered face and the homespun clothes of a hill farmer. "Don't you know your uncle, eh?" the man asked. At the same moment she recognized him for Judah, Aunt Clarissa's husband, whom she hadn't seen since she was a small thing. "Made it in 2 days," he boasted. "Slept right in the wagon." She tried to smile, but her heart was beating like a churning blade against her breast. What could have brought him here? Anything to do with Clarissa had always spelled trouble. "What's the matter?" She spoke as quietly as she could, feeling every eye in the crowded parlor turned their way. "Why have you come?" He sobered at once, as though remembering a solemn duty. "Your Aunt Clarissa thought you need be told." "Told what?" A chill went through her. "Your ma's never been stout, you know. The fever? Did she catch the fever?" He glanced around at the girls seated in the room who were pretending not to listen, but whose ears stood up, alert as wild creatures in a meadow. He lowered his voice, tapping his head. "Stout up here, eh?" Lyddie stared at him. What had they done to her mother? Judah dropped his eyes, uncomfortable under her stare. "So we been obliged—" "What have you done to my mother?" she whispered fiercely. "We been obliged to remand her to Brattleboro, to the asylum down there." "But that's for crazy folk." Judah put on a face of hound dog sorrow and sighed deeply. It were just too much care for poor Clarissa, delicate as she be. "Why didn't you ask me? I've been responsible for her before. I can do it." He cocked his head. "You weren't there, eh? Where's Rachel? What have you done with the baby?" "Why," he said, relieved to have gotten off the subject of her mother, "why, she's just fine. Right out front in the wagon. I brung her to you." Lyddie brushed past him out the door. The farm wagon stood outside. The patient oxen, oblivious to how comically out of place they looked on a city street, chewed their cuds contentedly. For all the stuffiness upstairs, it was damp and chilly down on the street, and Rachel sat shivering on the bench of the wagon, wrapped in a worn shawl that Lyddie recognized as her mother's. She climbed up on the wagon step and lifted the child down. Rachel was too light, boneless as a rag doll. As Lyddie went up the steps of the boarding house, she could feel her tiny burden trembling through the shawl. "It's all right, Rachie. It's me, Lyddie," she said, hoping the child could remember her. She carried Rachel inside to where Judah still stood, nervously pinching the rim of his sweat-stained hat. "It's your sister Rachie," Judah boomed out, his voice fake with hearty cheer. A gasp went up from the girls in the parlor. "Like Aunt Clarissa told you, eh? We brung you to Lyddie. Have you got her things?" In answer, he went out to the wagon and brought back a sack with a small lump at the bottom. "What about my mother's things?" she asked coldly, no longer caring about the audience and what they heard. "There weren't hardly nothing," he said. She let it go. He was nearly right. "Well," he said, looking from one sister to the other, "I'll be off then, eh? I'm coming to fetch our mother as soon as I can. As soon as I pay off the debt, I'll take her back home and care for her myself." He turned at the door, the hat brim rolled tight and squeezed in his big hands. "Back where?" "Home," she repeated. "To the farm." "We be sellin' it," he said. "We got to have the money for Brattleboro." "No!" Her voice was so sharp that the roomful of girls stopped everything they were doing to stare. Even little Rachel twisted in her arms to look at her with alarm. She went close to Judah and lowered her voice again to a fierce whisper. "No one can sell that land except my father. He give permission." How? She was seized with a wild hope. Her father? They had heard from him? When? Before he left, he had it wrote out and put his mark to it, in case, eh? She wanted to scream at him, but how could she? She had already frightened Rachel. "You got no right," she said between her teeth. "We got no choice," the man said stubbornly. "We be responsible," and he was gone. Once more Lyddie was aware of the other girls in the room, who were watching her open-mouthed and gaping at the dirty little bundle in her arms. She buried her face in the shawl. "Come on, Rachie," she said, as much to them as to the child. "We got to go meet Miss Bedloe." She straightened up tall and made her way through the chairs and knees to the kitchen. Miss Bedloe? The housekeeper was sitting in the kitchen rocker peeling potatoes for tomorrow's hash. "What in heaven's name?" At the housekeeper's sharp question, Rachel's little head came up from the depths of the shawl like a turtle from a shell. "It's Rachel, Miss Bedloe," Lyddie made her voice as gentle as she could. "My sister Rachel." She could read the warning in Miss Bedloe's eyes. No men, no children, except for the keeper's own, in a corporation house, but surely the woman would not have the heart. "I'm begging a bath for her. She's had a long, rough journey in an ox cart, and she's chilled right through, eh, Rachie?" Rachel stiffened in her arms, but Miss Bedloe dropped her paring knife into the bowl of peeled potatoes, wiped her hands on her apron, and put a kettle on to boil. It was only after they had both seen Rachel Rachel safely asleep in Lyddie's bed that Miss Bedloe said the words that Lyddie knew were on her mind. "It won't do, you know. She can't stay here. I'll get her a job. She can doff. You know she's not old enough or strong enough to be a doffer. Just till I can straighten things out," Lyddie pleaded. "Please let her stay. I'll get it all set in just a few days, eh?" Miss Bedloe sighed and made to shake her head. "I'll pay, of course, full board, and you see how small she is. You know she won't eat a full share." Miss Bedloe sat down and picked up her paring knife. Lyddie held her breath. "A week. Even then, it wouldn't be more'n a fortnight. I give you my vow. I just got to write my brother." Miss Bedloe looked doubtful, but she didn't say no. She just sighed and started to peel again, the long coil so thin it was almost transparent. "I'm obliged to you, Miss Bedloe. I got nowhere to turn else. She mustn't go outdoors. We can't have her seen about the premises." No, I swear. I'll keep her in my room. The other girls won't even know." Miss Bedloe looked at Lyddie wryly. "They already know, and there's no guarantee they'll keep their peace. I'll beg 'em. No need to coop her up more than necessary. She can come down with me during the day. I'll have Tim help her with her letters and numbers in the afternoon. She ought to be in school herself. She will be, Miss Bedloe, she will be. Soon as I can get things worked out. I swear upon my life. You need to watch your language, my girl. Set an example for the little one. I thank you, Mrs. Bedloe. You'll not be sorry, I promise." She wrote Charlie that night after curfew in the flickering light of a forbidden stub of candle. "Dear Brother Charles, I hope you are well. I am sorry to trouble you with sad news, but Uncle Judah come tonight to Lowell and brung Rachel to me. They have put our mother to the asylum at Brattleboro. Now they are thinking to sell the farm. You must go and stop them. You are the man of the family. Judah won't pay me no mind. They got to listen to you. I got more than $100 to the debt. Do not let them sell Charlie, I beg you. I don't know what to do with Rachel. Children are not allowed in Corporation House. If I can, I will take her home, but I got to have a home to go to. It is up to you, Charlie. Please, I beg you, stop Uncle Judah. Your loving sister, Lydia Worthen." She could hardly keep her mind on her work. What was the use of it all anyway if the farm was gone? But it couldn't be. Not after all her sweating and saving. And what was she to do with Rachel? The child hadn't spoken a word since her arrival. She hadn't even cried. She seemed more dead than alive, and precious time must be spent finding her a place to stay, and precious money put out for her keep, more if she was to go to school. Why couldn't the child work in the spinning room? There were Irish children down there who looked no older than 7 or 8. They were earning their own way. Hadn't Lyddie herself been working hard since she was no more than a tadpole? And doffing wasn't as hard as farm work. Why, those children hardly worked 15 minutes out of the hour, just taking off the full spools and replacing them with empty ones. Then they just sat in the corner and played or chatted. Sometimes, from the window on a clear day, Lyddie had seen them running about the mill yard playing tag or marbles. It was an easy life compared to the farm, and still Rachel would be out of mischief and earning her own way. As if she hadn't trouble enough, Bridget was crying again. Lyddie glanced over at the loom. Everything seemed in order, but the Irish girl was standing there, staring at the shuddering machine with tears running down her cheeks. Lyddie quickly checked her own looms before walking over and saying in the girl's ear, "What's the matter with you, eh?" Bridget looked around startled. She bit her lip and shook her head. Lyddie shrugged. It was just as well if the girl learned to bear her own troubles. Mr. Marsden stopped Lyddie at the stairs on the way to breakfast. Her heart nodded. How could he have heard about Rachel already? Had one of the other girls tattled so soon? They were jealous of her, Lyddie knew. She was the best operator on the floor, but it was not about Rachel that Mr. Marsden wished to speak. It was about the wretched Irish girl. "You must tell her," he said, "that she must get her speed up. I can't keep her on, even as a spare hand, unless she can maintain a proper pace." Why didn't he tell her himself? He was the overseer. Bridget did not belong to her. She hadn't asked for a spare hand, hadn't wanted one, and now he was trying to shove the responsibility off on her. She spoke to Bridget after the break. "He says you'll have to speed up or he can't keep you on." The girl's eyes widened in fear, reminding Lyddie, oh cuss it, of Rachel's silent face as the child sat crouched within herself in the corner of Miss Bedloe's kitchen. "Oh tarnation," she hollered in Bridget's ear. "I'll help you. We'll do the 5 looms together for a few days, just till you get on better, eh?" The girl smiled faintly, still frightened. "And keep your mind on your blooming work, you hear? We can't have you catching your hair or being hit in the head by a flying shuttle because you're being because your mind is someplace else." Fresh tears started in the girl's eyes, but she bit her lip again and nodded. Lyddie could see Diana smiling approval. Good thing she couldn't hear me, Lyddie thought wryly. She wouldn't be thinking I was so kindly then. By the 7 o'clock bell, Bridget was looking a little less distraught, and Mr. Marsden came past to pat both girls proudly. Lyddie sighed and hardly bothered to dodge him. She had gotten off the fewest pieces in one day since she'd had 4 looms, and she still had to go home to the burden of silent little Rachel. "Well, it won't do," said Miss Bedloe. "She won't talk to either Tim or me. Not a word. Just sits trembling in the corner like a frozen mouse. Did she manage to eat anything?" "Did she manage to eat? She eats like she hasn't had food in a month of Sundays. I fed her with Tim. She out-ate him, and he a growing boy. But never a word through it all. Just shovels it in like there'll never be another plateful this side of the grave." Lyddie looked at the housekeeper's face, pinched with anger, and then down at the top of Rachel's head. The child was trembling. Like Oliver, she thought. Like Oliver. "For more, that boy will be hung. I know that boy will be hung." "Oh, Rachie, I don't want to think of you hungry. I'll pay you more," she promised Miss Bedloe. "It isn't the money." But it was quite clear to Lyddie that it was indeed the money in addition to the risk, so Lyddie vowed to fetch payment from the bank the very next day. She had to buy time, at least until she heard from Charlie. When she had finished her own supper, she fetched Rachel from the kitchen, took her out to the privy, and then led her by hand up the staircase to the bedroom. All of this was accomplished with neither of them saying a word aloud, although inside Lyddie's head lengthy conversations were bouncing about. As she tucked the quilt about the child, she tried some of her practice lines aloud. "What did you do today, Rachie? Did Tim make you do some schoolwork? Ain't Miss Bedloe funny? She's all right, eh? Just scared to break a rule. We got to do what the corporation says, you know, 'cause if we don't, we're out of a job. And then what would we do, eh?" There was no answer. She hadn't expected any. Still. "You mustn't be worried, Rachie. Judah can't sell the farm. Charlie and me, we won't let him. We're keeping it for Papa." Was there a flicker of life in the eyes? "And Mama? And Charlie and Rachie and Lyddie, too." Did she just imagine the child had relaxed a little against the pillow, or was it a trick of the candlelight? Maybe if she read aloud as Betsy had to her. She opened Oliver Twist and commenced. When Rachel fell asleep, she didn't know. Lyddie was lost in the comfort of the familiar words. When the bell rang, she blew out the candle and lay in the darkness, feeling the presence of the small body nearby. What could she do? Where could she turn for help? She couldn't keep Rachel here, and yet she, Lyddie, must live in a corporation house to keep her job, and without her job, what good could she do for any of them? But how could she put this little lost child out with strangers? She cursed her aunt and uncle. What could they have been thinking of to bring the child here? And yet, wasn't she better off here with Lyddie, who loved her, than with those two, who must not have given her enough to eat? Poor little Rachel. Poor old Lyddie. She heaved herself over in bed. She had to sleep. There was nothing she could do until she heard from Charlie. Surely Charlie could stop Judah from selling the farm, and then, debt or no debt, she'd take Rachel home. Let them try to get her off that land again. Just let them try. In her uneasy sleep she saw the bear again, but suddenly, in the midst of his clumsy thrashing about, he threw off the pot and was transformed, leaping like a spring buck up into the loft where they were huddled, and she could not stare him down.